I had a stalker. Still do that, contacting electronically, and it got to the point where I had to get police intervention, and I sent police to speak to this person, and it just escalated straight after.
In my case, and many of them, these people aren't hiding. They're out in the open. They're using their own names. They're not even trying to keep it a secret.
Welcome back to part 2 of my discussion with Nicole Madigan. If you missed part 1, we were talking about Nicole's experience as a victim survivor of a stalker who created chaos in her life, and it went on for 3 years. We're now going to find out how that played out, and we're also going to discuss how we could better deal with stalkers. So, Nicole, welcome back.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm just overwhelmed with all the information that comes out about stalking. Mm-hmm. Your experience and why it is such a difficult thing to come to terms with, and the impact it had on your life. I'd seen it, and I probably, as a homicide detective, seen it, at the worst end when physical violence has occurred. But the impact it had on you over the 3 years, it must have taken its toll.
Yeah, it really did, and I think the longer something goes on, the more helpless you feel because you've let it go on so long. And the longer you let something go on, the harder it feels to be able to stop.
And was there any point where, and victim blaming, where others in different situations that have found themselves at the target of a stalker, did you think, oh, why didn't I just nip this in the bud to start with? Did you second guess yourself?
Yeah, I did. There was a couple of points there where I thought, why didn't I just not retaliate, but just do something about it? Like, you live your life, and I'm not a confrontational person, but I'm not a weak person generally either. And I did ask myself, why did I just sit there?
Why did I put up with this?
And just let it happen? Yeah, until it's become so big. And of course, in a strange way, and I guess stalking perpetrators and other abusers know this, that they know that they can get away with it. They can see that you're not going to do anything, and that just emboldens them further. It doesn't stop them. I think it just makes them realise that they can keep doing it, and you're not going to do anything about it.
That's probably the difficulty in assessing what the best path is, because you just don't know, do you?
You just don't know. Yeah.
You could have in the very first time she contacted you, just fired back this, "You leave me alone. Don't you dare contact me again. I'm going to the police." It might have worked. But it might have escalated even further. You just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, even the brazenness of her doing this under her own name kind of baffled me. Like, I sort of thought to myself, she's clearly not afraid that I will share the posts or share the messages and people will see them, maybe her boss or her family. But then that adds another element of, I guess, fear to it too, that if you're that brazen, and maybe you're not bothered if people see it. So.
Well, I look at it this way: when you've got a rational mind, I'm talking about yourself, and you're looking at how this person would react, like, surely she must be embarrassed that she's doing that. You're trying to put rational thoughts into an irrational mind. And that's where I find it is concerning dealing with people like this. Like, you can't anticipate how they're going to think, because they're not thinking on the same wavelength that you and I are perhaps thinking.
Exactly. And that's what I guess it sort of serves as to make you feel a little bit crazy yourself. It's almost like you gaslight yourself a little bit into thinking, am I missing something? Am I missing something here? Yeah.
I understand all those emotions. That we all put on a brave front, but we're insecure in our own ways. And when you've got someone attacking you, have I deserved this? Is there something that I've done? That type of thing. So how did it play out? You went to the police, and just break it down what the steps are, because I think people listening to this, and I'm sure there's people out there with similar type situations, and they'd be interested how your situation played out.
Yeah, so 2 things prompted me to act again in that final instance. It was the mention of my address, I suppose, and that fear of real life stalking, or whether, she had in fact moved to the suburb. I mean, if someone's gone to those lengths, you've got quite a serious problem there.
And that's not sorry to interrupt, but it's not just yourself. You've got your family, you've got your kids there.
That's
too.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And my elder kids were just sort of starting to get onto social media and things like that too. So it's, it was all just a bit, it was just getting too much. I was very fearful of being identified, and ultimately I was identified. I was contacted by someone who knew Karissa, who reached out to me because she had seen everything play out. In the end, it was a blessing in disguise though, because she had been through something similar with the same person.
Yep.
So that really, that exchange just shifted my thinking, because she completely validated all of my fears. So I felt like I was right to be scared, and I should do something.
Yeah, that came across in your book, that it was a lifted a burden from you that someone else had been a victim of this same type of behaviour by the person that was stalking you.
That's right, and they felt the same way. They were scared. They projected that to me. So I felt like entitled to feel that way.
Okay, that makes sense, because you're not out on your own now, and at last. So that must have been a big relief to you.
Yeah, it was a huge source of relief. So that inspired me to act, but I also took a different approach. I found that when I was going in and talking to police, I was underselling, I don't know if that's the right term, but I was sort of downplaying or not expressing what had happened properly, and it's quite hard to describe 3 years worth of small ongoing events.
Yep.
So I ended up putting in a cybercrime report where I included lengthy, explicit details about everything that had happened. It was very long, a very long report, and I didn't know whether that would go anywhere. I just thought I'd give it a try. And ultimately that was referred to my local police station.
Yep.
And it was many months later before, I got to actually speak to someone, but that was the catalyst to get things moving. And the officer I got put in touch with was incredibly supportive and helpful.
Oh, that must have been a relief for you, someone that understood. And
that first conversation was just so it was just such a relief, because you could hear that she was reacting with, shock and horror when I said something. There was no dismissing of it whatsoever, and she did take it seriously, and she's the one that first used the expression, or put the crime of stalking to what was happening. I still hadn't done that.
Okay. And so how did it move forward from there?
So it was tricky. So, and this comes back to, the challenges of getting charges through, because it's one thing to have a law, but it was quite different to get that across. I thought it was going to be quite straightforward. I had a big pile of evidence. That's the first thing. I think not everyone has that, and I had a very detailed pile of evidence. And then context also had to be put into it. So with stalking, I suppose, because it goes on for so long, the perpetrator gets to know their victim, and they're able to, over time, communicate with that victim without being specific, if that makes sense. So when they're talking about you, and when they're sending you a message.
A terminology or some phrase that they use, or the manner in which they're expressing it.
That's right. And in my case, some really, unpleasant nicknames unfolded over the time.
Yeah.
So I was able to clearly know when something was directed at me, but I was required or asked by the police officer to demonstrate that somehow.
I can see how that would be difficult. I know she's talking about me, and you'd feel like the crazy lady.
Yeah.
Well, but she's not using your name, but she's talking about me.
Yeah.
So the detail of the evidence that you gathered, and the fact I think you're in a good a position as anyone could be, being a journalist, that you know how to factually document what's occurred.
I think so, and that's why I really, I became quite passionate about it, because it was even for me who works this way day to day, it was tricky to go right back and say, okay, well, here are the messages that specifically name me and those nicknames, and then here's how it manifested over time. So it's not easy. It was tricky to do. But I did it anyway, so that was helpful. And in the end, they also needed or wanted a a third-party witness statement, and, the person who had contacted me was kind enough to provide that.
And this is a person who'd gone down the same path or been subject to the stalking.
Yeah, that's right. And her experience, her personal experience wasn't relevant. The police made that clear because it had nothing to do with me, but her account of what she had seen in relation to me was just another little source of evidence.
Okay. And so, with gathering all that evidence, were you informed that the police were going to go interview Karissa?
Yeah, so, after all of that, it was quite several months, they said they would go and speak with her. They spoke with her on the phone, and when she first called me back, sorry, I'm just going to have to have a drink.
You're
right. When she first called me back, she said that Karissa had said, it's all been taken out of context and everything like that. And I sort of had a bit of a panic attack. What does that mean? But the police officer said, no, that's just the first step. But we'll continue to look into it. And then more months went by. She cancelled a few appointments, ignored a few calls and everything like that. And then out of the blue, I just got an email to say that she'd been charged with unlawful stalking.
Okay. How did that make you feel?
It was a strange combination of just shock and relief. Because I was starting to think it wouldn't go there. Yeah. Because it was sort of dragging on a long time, and she was giving, I didn't know what she was saying or what she had, conjured up to tell the police. So, it was an absolutely incredible relief.
Yeah, I could imagine it would be. You feel like you've been validated to a degree. That all these things, it wasn't just in my imagination. That
absolutely
warrants police taking action of a charge.
Yeah,
and it's also, I would imagine, or not imagine, I know it from a police point of view. You go and speak to a person like that, and she will have 1,000 reasons why. Oh no, but you misinterpreted it. It's not out of context. We get on fine. It was just we had a falling out. That type of stuff. They throw up all that misinformation. It's very hard to decipher through what's fact and fiction.
Absolutely. And because she had also created some fake accounts in my name, I didn't know whether she could have provided those or sent herself some more messages on my behalf. I just wasn't sure, how concrete the evidence had to be.
And breaking it down, I'm probably looking at it too simplistically, but breaking it down, there is a lot of complexities to the investigation, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
And generally speaking, it's going to police. It's probably passed on to detectives in New South Wales. I think a detective would get that case. But, there is a lot to do.
Yeah, and this police officer was amazing. She put in a lot of work over a long period of time. She didn't just get rid of it because it was dragging on so long. And ultimately she secured that charge for me.
Shout out to police officers like that, because quite often they make a difference in people's lives. So full credit to her. And there's a lot of police out there like that, and they literally make the difference between success or failure of an investigation. So going to court, did you have to give evidence at court?
No, so I provided all of my evidence to her.
Yep.
I was asked to write a victim impact statement, which again, I would say, this is something else that makes it difficult for victim survivors because, I had a distinct advantage in being able to put this together. Yep. A, because, I write for a living, and B, I had access to some others to see how they were formulated because I didn't have any advice on that. I just was left to do it. And in the end, according to the judge, that victim impact statement made quite a difference. So I had to provide that. All of my screenshots, and that was about it. In the end, I did attend court, and that proved to be a benefit too because... I'm
mortified by what happened at the court. She pleaded guilty.
She pleaded guilty.
Okay, but then the prosecution didn't seem to have their head around the circumstances, facts, and all sorts of misinformation. Yeah,
so this was obviously my first encounter with this type of thing. So I sat through a whole day of other offences, other sentencings and things like that. And it was similar across the board, I've got to say. So for all the work that the police officer put in, very little of that seemed to be come across from the prosecutor.
Yeah.
He really, it felt like, not to be critical, but it felt like he was reading from some notes as he presented that.
Yeah.
But, and also the judge asked him a couple of questions about it, like how long it had gone on, what was the frequency of the contact, and he couldn't answer any of those.
And you're sitting in court, and I can only imagine how frustrating that would be, a culmination of all this pain and suffering that you've been through, and you're finally thinking, this is where I'm going to get justice, or this is where the system will do the right thing. And you're getting the prosecutor's getting asked basic questions like that and didn't have the information.
Yeah, by this point I thought, I'm going to be laughed out of here and everything's about to get worse.
There was one point, I forget which part about it, but when you're describing yourself in court, and I'm thinking, she's got to stand up and just start screaming at this point in time. Did you feel like that?
I felt like it, yeah. I really did. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the book, the judge addressed me in the end and asked if I could answer those questions, which I wasn't expecting, of course, because I thought they're just there to witness what's happening, which I agreed to, but I was, incredibly nervous and overwhelmed. And this was the first time I'd been in the same room as this person.
Yeah.
And hearing her speak for the first time outside of that one little encounter all those years ago. So I did answer her questions, and it went from there. So, they tried to get a more lenient sentence, obviously. But I was, again, I think fortune comes into play. This judge
had
clearly recognised what had happened. And she specifically made reference to my victim impact statement because it was quite detailed.
Well, I read the statement, and it was very factual, accurate account of the impact of what occurred and the impact that it had on you. So I can imagine that the judge would take that into consideration.
Yeah, and I guess that's luck of the draw a little bit.
Again.
But I was lucky there, and she she did give a relative to what I had seen that day, she gave a reasonable sentence to what anyone could expect to get, and she also added the restraining order, which the prosecution did not request.
And that,
Yeah.
What do you say? That seemed ridiculous to me.
Yeah, because the police
nature
officer...
of the offence. And no restraining order requested.
And the police officer who was helping me had said that that's what she was going to ask for. So I was expecting it, but it didn't happen. So if it wasn't for that judge, I may not have had that.
Oh, well, look, with court systems, they're not perfect. I've said it a couple of times on the podcast, but the court system is as good as the information's provided to it. And if the information doesn't come through, miscarriages of justice can occur. And if you were in the end, but the fortunate part, in the end, you were satisfied with the sentence? Yeah,
look, I was. Like I said, relative to what I had seen, the cases that came before me were quite violent cases of domestic violence, and they were all being given. Everyone there, I think, got given the same sentence. So, I was actually thinking, if this is what they're getting, this may not work out. But it did. Because
it wasn't a custodial sentence, so it was good behaviour report to psychologist or something along those lines, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was a 2-year probation order.
Probation, yeah.
Yep, and a 2-year restraining order.
Okay. With it, the courts should take into account the impact it has on people, and maybe it's the justice system doesn't fully... if she walked up and punched you in the face and broke your nose, there's a good chance that she might have done some jail time. But the impact that she's had on you emotionally, psychologically, financially, socially, and all that, I suppose it's harder to quantify, but
It is. It's much harder. I think if there was sort of, direct violent threats or actual physical violence, it's much easier to prove. But I also think, a lot of people in a similar situation would struggle to get even this outcome, I've got to say, just because of what's required and, also the difficulties and the complexities within from every step of the way.
Yeah, well, you've had to basically fight the every step of the way, haven't you?
You've got to be really, really proactive, and if you've got, some kind of barriers, whether that be, English as a second language or different levels of education or just different people that you're encountering, a different type of police officer or something.
How difficult it would be.
It could be very different.
In those situations. So your experience, what you experienced there, that inspired you to delve a bit deeper into it, and I suppose it's a journalist in you. You've been through that, and that led to your research and doing the book Obsession.
Yep.
It's fascinating what you found out about stalking. And I think if people listening to this, and it's something that if we can achieve any good on a podcast, is people understanding the nature of the crime and the type of things that can happen. In the book, there's a number of examples of people that have suffered similar situations to yourself. Is there one that sort of sticks in mind, an incident, and you could just describe that briefly?
Yeah, I think I interviewed a woman who had been, I guess you would say, she was a victim of a predatory stalker. And I guess, it was quite a shocking case because it's not something we're used to. It wasn't online, it was in real life. But it was through, I guess, traditional ways, traditional methods of doing the exact same thing, I suppose. So letters, detailed letters, explicit letters, photos, leaving products and things like that. And she had a lot of trouble getting that across with police because in the beginning she did a similar thing, I suppose, to what other people do by deleting messages and things like that. She threw them away. This is horrible. Just throw it away.
Get it out of your life.
Rid of it. Yeah, and it's only as sort of time went on that she realised this was a stalking situation, and by then it can almost be too late. In her case, I think her home was broken into, and the perpetrator ended up being someone that she'd just come across. So she'd just come across in her line of work, brief encounter, and they'd become very fixated on her. And she'd maybe had one or two conversations since then, bumping into at the shops or something like that. And ultimately he let her know. I guess it's that urge to let your victim know that it's you who's the obsessed one, because he eventually let his identity known, and that was the only way that she got police action, was that he actually admitted it to her.
Right. It is very, very... this is no technical term. It's just creepy. It's just creepy.
Yeah. It's creepy that it's happening, and it seems to me that in my case and most of the cases, the perpetrator wants you to know that they're there. It's not just their private obsession. They want you to know.
Well, that gets their gratification. It's me that's causing your life to be turned upside down.
Exactly.
That comes across. Very interesting. One person, and it's interesting when you hear it from the other side. One person that was actually a stalker that you spoke to, and he told his story. Do you want to just describe that briefly?
Yeah. So I think I was really intrigued when this person agreed to talk to me about it from another perspective, because it's not something people are proud to admit, I suppose. But he had taken the steps to attend therapy and everything like that. So he was out the other side.
Yeah.
But so he had been in a relationship, a great one, that they were both wrapped in each other. Eventually, strangely enough, he ended the relationship with this person, but regretted it soon after. And he described to me that he never was an obsessive type of person. He tells me that this had never happened before. He'd never fixated on anything, but within a few weeks of that breakup, he just developed this obsession, couldn't think about anything else, couldn't let it go. And then lost the willpower to just have that obsession remain in his mind, and started contacting her. And when she didn't want the contact, he'd find another way to contact, or he'd hack her social media accounts, or he'd get friends to look. At one point, he turned up at a venue where they used their detective work, so he'd found out where she was going to be, and he turned up. Then he started purposefully, dating other women that looked like her, and it was affecting his whole entire life. But I guess the difference with him and what you see elsewhere is he recognised the impact it was having on his own life, and that it wasn't healthy or right. So he sought help for himself.
It's interesting to get that perspective, but the fact that he recognised what he was doing, and that's that checks and balances. I think probably you live life, you've had a broken heart or whatever. We all know that feeling, but it's how you act on those feelings. And
that's right. And perhaps his was an unusual situation, I suppose, because he's also claiming that this hadn't happened to him before.
Yeah.
I guess we've all, like you say, got a tendency to, like, how can this be? Like, if something happens and we don't want it to happen, it's hard to let go.
Yes.
But we do. But as far as a lot of the research goes, most people, the experts tell me, that engage in this type of behaviour probably have done it before or will do it again. There's a predisposition to that kind of fixation and obsession.
And I suppose with that's the importance of documenting what's happened here. And I don't think the public fully appreciate this, but there's provision within the police that you can make a report and it's kept as an intelligence report. Like, it might be something that didn't really amount to a criminal offence, but hey, I broke up with this guy or this girl, and this is what they did for 6 months. I just want it recorded. So then if that name's put in the computer, especially into this day and age, we've got the computer systems that you can put in a name and link it to any other station that with that information. Maybe that's what we've got to do and fight back, because the world has changed, hasn't it, with social media, and stalking used to be a very physical thing. Now it's the electronic stalking, and it frightens me how much you can find out about a person just by looking at social media.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed things in so many ways. I mean, there's that very fact. You can research a lot easier. You can find out a whole lot of information and when you're armed with that information, it's easier to inflict fear because you have that information. It's much easier to contact people. Like, it's a lot more difficult and risky if you write a letter or deliver a letter or leave a gift. Behind social media or the internet, you're completely protected, and we're still dealing with, we can make accounts and not put our identity in there. So it's pretty hard it's pretty easy to be anonymous.
Yeah.
Or to even... You can even say who you are, but there's no proof, is there? Because you don't have to identify yourself when you create a social media account or an email or anything for that matter. So it's much easier to stalk.
Easier to stalk and harder to disappear too. Like, from a social media, it's easier to track people down and work out how to communicate.
Yeah, that's right. And it's underplaying it to just simply say, oh, well, you don't have to be on social media when it's such it's such a part of the world now. If you work for yourself, or if you have a business, or if you just want to function normally, that's part of life.
I'm glad you brought up that point, because it's a point I wanted to make, that crimes are about the impact it has on the victims. When you say just stay off social media, who can stay off social media in this day and age? Yeah, that's the way people are communicating. So
that's right.
It's a big impost on someone.
It's a big ask, and I think I think you pointed this out before. It's like before social media, it would be the same as saying to someone, well, just don't check your mail, just don't check your letterbox, and don't check your PO box, and don't go outside. It
doesn't really work out that way, does it? We talk perceptions, and that, it's this obsessed person, it's so romantic and all that. We've got to change that. How do we change that? Like, what's the movies, and there's a whole list of movies that you put, Love Actually and all those rom-coms. There's always some lunatic that's chasing someone that's rejected their advances, and then that person capitulates and they live happily ever after. It's probably the wrong perception, isn't it?
I think it's tricky too, because it's been part of our psyche for decades, really, forever, really, that idea of saying no and being pursued, and the persistent. Usually, it's the man who's being persistent, and they must be. If they're not, then, like, if you reject them and they disappear, well,
he
that's
couldn't
not
have been really interested.
He hasn't really fought for me, has he? Like, so I think that's ingrained in our kind of culture. The experts that I spoke to referred to the fact that even in our, so it's changed a little bit with dating apps, I suppose, but that the way man pursues a female is
and the female resists. This
you
is
don't want to seem too keen or too eager and all of that sort of thing. So I think it's ingrained. So it's a difficult thing to break, I think, because there's something, I think, in everybody that has that likes the fact that someone is so into them that they'll go to all these lengths. So it's tricky to fight, I think, but it's important that we do because, that becomes a justification for this kind of horrible behaviour and it trivialises it so people don't take it seriously.
Well, it's, we touched on Valentine's Day, the anonymous card, which, I'm thinking back, 10, 20 years ago, no one thought anything about that now. Now, if you had a card dropped with someone, I've been watching you, you'd be thinking that's a little bit creepy.
That's exactly what I'd be thinking now. And I confessed in the book that when I was younger, I liked that idea.
Yeah.
I used to think I used to hear about it from other people.
You've got
and
a secret. You've got
where's
a secret.
mine? Like, where's my secret admirer?
Secret admirer.
Yeah, there seemed like something romantic about it, but it really is not because when you look at it further, they know who you are. You don't know who they are, and you don't know what they know about you.
Yeah. Okay. Breaking it down, reporting to police. Now, police are the first port of call. There's no one else you can speak to when you're going through this situation. And I think some of the way that police deal with it from a very, and I'm not putting police down here. It's I'm not a police officer anymore, but I'm still thinking as a police officer. We see things in a sort of black and white situation. Okay, what's the injury? What's the offence? I liken trying to anticipate what's going to happen with stalking, and I use the analogy, it mightn't be perfect, but it fits a little bit. And I talk about terrorist investigations, where does an ideology turn into an action? And that's a fine line that you've got to work out when you're investigating potential terrorist offences. With the stalking, at what point do the police say enough is enough? Where is the line drawn with that? From your experience dealing with the police, have you got anything you could add to that?
Look, I think your own personal instinct needs to come into play. I think the difficulty with stalking is that a lot of the time the behaviours are not illegal, like we've talked about. There are some parallels to coercive control, I think, in that you're talking about a whole bunch of technically legal behaviours that are used in a way to inflict fear and control or control. And that in itself is what becomes the illegal thing. So I guess it's important, I think I would tell people, is don't ignore it. If that action has caused you fear, don't be ashamed to admit that, even if it is a something minor, and go and report it to police. And knowing what I know now, and also even just from this discussion that we're having, get them to make a note of it and report it if you can. I spoke to an expert who has worked in other countries, and that's a critical part of their stalking response, is that when you go in, they're trained, I suppose, to recognise, someone's reporting that their garden gnome was moved and they're scared about it, rather than send them away. That should trigger something. If that's causing them to come in, possibly there's more to it, and possibly there's a pattern of behaviour that needs to be established.
And perhaps I could add to that, if you're going in there as a member of the public to report to a police station, you're entitled to get the name of the police officer you're reporting it to, and you're also entitled to get an event number of where it's been documented. So if in the perfect world, the situation stops, the police mightn't have done anything and the person's lost interest. But if it starts up 6 months again later, they can then come back and refer to that particular event, and I spoke to such and such an officer. Yeah. So that would be the advice. But I do understand the concept of not doing anything. Anything that might enrage the person, like let's just as you went through, but if it's happening, I think your probably best position is reporting it to the police and getting them to at least document it, so you've got a record there if it continues on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do think so. Just based on my own experience and the people I spoke to, and the really important thing to remember is that the police are there to help, and to just throw the stigma and the shame out of the window, because I think that's what holds people back. They believe they're not going to be taken seriously, so they don't make the report in the first place, or they tell someone and they don't get the response thereafter, so they withdraw.
And I think so many people come into a police station going, we know you're busy, I don't want to trouble you. And that's it's the beauty of people. We're so generous, and look, my problem's bad, but it's not as bad as the other person's problem. And I think there's an element of that.
Yeah.
What we have across the country, and I know with Queensland, the coercive control legislation that's been brought in, and also down in New South Wales. And just a description of the type of thing I'm talking here. Coercive control is a form of domestic violence that involves a pattern of behaviour that cumulatively denies the victim of their autonomy and independence. This offence encompasses a pattern of psychological, sexual, spiritual, financial and other forms of abuse that affect many Australians. However, was previously not included in domestic violence legislation. So there is an understanding that this type of behaviour, which is not dissimilar to what stalking is, occurs in the domestic violence situation, and across the country we've recognised that and making differences. Maybe we just need to make sure that also can encapsulate the stalking side of things, looking at it from, it doesn't have to be a physical injury. It's not assault occasioning actual bodily harm. It can be that coercive control, making you change your patterns, changing your car registration, moving home, that type of thing.
That's right. In both of those situations, fear is used to control. In a domestic violence situation, it's actual control, I suppose. Yep. You mustn't go there, you mustn't wear that. And in a stalking situation or a non-DV situation, it's just control through fear, really. You're going to modify your behaviour if you're scared, because you don't want to get a response or trigger a response. I guess the difficulty in both cases is educating people to be able to prove what's happening to them and to get on top of it early. Trust your instincts. If you feel scared, there's probably a good reason for that. So don't wait. It would be my suggestion. I'll call a friend, but your associate from the Netherlands that worked on this type of stalking and had her expertise in that field, talked about police being properly trained to recognise indicators, areas of concern, how to document it, how to interview the victims and get the information. I can see some benefits in there. Yeah, so that was Professor Cleo Brandt, and she worked with police in the Netherlands to develop their stalking response. And similar to the way things happen here, is that was triggered by some horrible cases, some murders, which usually, sadly, a murder has to take place before people do anything. But that triggered a whole reevaluation of the way they responded to stalking. And she's now in Australia and helping police in Victoria change the way they look at it. And she sort of said to me, she was quite envious of the way we handle domestic and family violence here compared to over there, because, police are learning more about that and how to recognise those signs. So the key sort of points that she made that were different were, one, training police to recognise pattern and recognise the significance of simple behaviours that are causing fear and recognising that as a potential for stalking. It's a red flag, I suppose, and understanding those rather than think that's just a minor thing, come back later. They also, and I guess this goes back to your advice with getting a name and a case number, they've established a pattern over there in the Netherlands that someone who comes in reporting stalking type behaviours is given the same officer that works on that.
Okay, so there's some connection or continuity.
That's right.
That's readily available.
Exactly, and they have keywords that are put into the system and things like that, so that it's flagged. If the same person's coming back reporting behaviours, it's flagged. Not only that, the people that come in are properly educated about what to do. So it's a little bit more than just keep a diary. It's a bit more detailed so that people know how to protect themselves and how to properly collate evidence, because it's not easy to do.
Yeah, well, with police, I saw it over the years that sometimes we're playing catch up, sometimes we're staying ahead of the game, but it's a learning process too. What we're dealing with in stalking now and having a full appreciation of it. But I think if you change perceptions, and you touched on it, that usually it's a tragic event that things change, and it sort of brings me to thinking about what we happened with Thomas Kelly, the 18-year-old boy here that was killed in a one-punch situation, and we've had his parents, Ralph and Kathy, on the podcast, and what they went through was horrific. But on the back of that and a couple of other similar type things, we got legislation change and lockout laws, and really made a difference for the way that we look at those sort of random assaults on the street. And what I did like about that too, they also changed the terminology. They got Danny Green, the boxer, in and talking about, because it used to be referred to as that one punch situation. That was just language that we all used, but now it's a coward punch, and that's just changing people's perception.
Yeah, and it's really, really significant, because when I was growing up, it was often referred to as a king hit, or almost like it was something, impressive.
A tough guy, a king hit, I knocked him out.
That's right. But my son, who's 14, has not heard that expression, and when he's referred to things that have happened, he calls it a coward punch. So it was very successful. It worked.
Yeah.
From my observations, that changed the way people thought about those people, including the people that they're often trying to impress. It changed, for young teenage boys to be referring to that as a weak, cowardly thing to do.
You're not going to be a hero by doing that.
Exactly.
You're going to be referred to as that's the bloke that did the coward punch.
Yeah. So it goes to show that you can change perception if the work's put in.
There's other examples like the Let Her Speak, which was brought in with the Stopping the Silence, sexual assault victims not being able to speak out, and I think Grace Tame had to do with that. Yeah,
she was part of that as well, because they're basically being told you can't talk about your own experience. So again, it's putting the it's putting the hard work on the victim survivors. It's muzzling them, and it's shifting the balance, I suppose. It's not putting the blame and the consequence where it should be.
Yeah.
And again, as is often the case, victims spearhead those campaigns, but they work, and it worked in that case.
And I think that's why, something like you're talking about, and having the courage to come out and talk about your own experience and getting that discussion happening, you can change things. Erin Molan, the personality, TV personality, with the trolls on social media. She came out very publicly and called them out, and that sort of, I think, has made a difference too. People are realising, no, it's not on.
It's not funny, yeah. And I think, I take my hat off to her, because, again...
Because she puts herself in a position to be even further criticised.
That's right. And when you're looking at stalking and trolling is similar in as much as people just simply do not take it seriously. So you're opening yourself wide up for more trolling. I mean, that's exactly what she did, and that's what she got.
Yeah.
But she just kept going. So, I'm really impressed by people who have that kind of strength and stamina to just keep on going and try to make change. And she was, she was able to do that. And I think perceptions have shifted and things are changing.
Yeah, well, it's Me Too movement, the whole thing.
Same thing, yeah.
There is a shift. So, I think with stalking, I don't know how you talk it. I talk it. It's a stalker is a creep. Let's not. There's nothing romantic about it. It's not. We understand you're trying vengeance. No, you're just being creepy. You're being told to stay away from this person. The person is not interested in you. Go away.
Yeah.
And if we get that perception out, you've got some other information in your book, and this was a study in 2014. I just read out an extract from that. That a 2014 Australian study into stalking attitudes suggested that prevailing stalking myths and stereotypes can have a genuine impact on the response of victim, survivor, family and friends, the police and the legal system. The study says, target public awareness campaigns minimise misperceptions about stalking in the community and may be of a benefit to ensure the victims receive appropriate support from peers and families. So what we're talking about is not a new idea, and even in this study they've been talking about it. We've got to change the perceptions of what stalking is all about.
Yeah, that's right, because, it's easy to say sort of perceptions or community attitudes don't matter if something is illegal because it's illegal. But it does matter because it starts right from the victim themselves, whether they're, like the studies have also shown that sort of general attitude prevents people from talking in the first place. That's why they don't talk about it or why they minimise it when they are talking about it. So it's a big ripple effect because they're minimising it themselves. Then the people around them do that and it just spreads. So until we change that, I think we're going to struggle with getting anywhere.
Yeah, well, it needs to change, and something more recent, this is in 2022, the Victorian Law Reform Commission, in an interim report looking at stalking, said, during the course of this reference, it became clear that stalking is an invisible crime, frequently not recognised by police, and even by those who experience it. It is often minimised or trivialised, and victim survivors are often expected to manage the situation on their own. That's exactly what you've been talking about. That's been your experience. That sort of encapsulates what's your experience.
Yeah.
And that was in an interim report.
That's right. Yeah. So everybody's going through the same thing, and it all jumps on top of each other to make a bigger impact, I suppose, because that is happening within the police. It's happening within the community, but then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I suppose, that the victims are going through because they do it to themselves as well as a result of the responses that they're getting.
Yeah. So to make a difference, and this is from that Law Reform Commission, they talked, and I haven't got the specific details, but in headings that police initiate intervention orders. So putting the onus on police that when you walk into the police station, okay, you've told us this has happened, not dissimilar to what we deal with domestic violence. If police attend a domestic violence situation, they take action. And not putting it back on the victim of the stalking, well, we'll leave it up to you. They take that decision away from the person.
Yeah, and I guess that comes down to, how much evidence do you need? Is reporting it enough? I guess in domestic violence situations, we have progressed so that if we're talking to a police officer about what's happening, they will do that. They'll intervene and get a DVO in place. You can get that to happen. But I think, we've got a bit of a long way to go with getting police to be proactive in that situation. We spoke a little bit before about police, knocking on the door and giving a warning. Whether or not, there is some concern about that escalating things. But the research, that I found, according to Professor Brandt in the Netherlands, showed that, a very big chunk of those people have been sort of unexpectedly consumed by their own obsession as well. And they're viewing themselves as a victim, not really recognising the risks they're posing to themselves by breaking the law.
Right.
So in those cases, if a police officer does go and visit them and they suddenly realise, well, hang on, I'm not just trying to get answers or trying to get revenge, I'm breaking the law, that can encourage them to stop, unless they are a killer or a more extreme criminal, that can encourage them to stop. Whereas in my experience here, that was not on offer. I actually asked that of one of them. I thought that might be a good idea, just go and warn her. But that wasn't part of it. Until I could prove it. There was nothing that could be done. Yeah,
it's a difficult one because no one really knows what's going to happen. I was going to say a friend of a friend, but I probably let it out of the bag saying I had a stalker. Still do that, contacting electronically, and it got to the point where I had to get police intervention, and I sent police to speak to this person, and it just escalated straight after. After I had police, I didn't want to take. I made a decision not to press charges or whatever, but just sort of tried it, saying, look, could you stop it, basically, and leave me alone. It didn't work. It's a hard call. I could have gone, I'm going to take action, and the charges, I could have made a complaint, had the charges, but then I was worried then I would become part of that person's life, which I didn't want to become part of that person's life. I'd never met that person.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that person would have achieved what that person wanted to if we had to sit in the same court. Well,
that's a really good point, because I think a lot of the time that is what they want. That they do want that connection. And I guess that was my way of thinking, in the beginning was, she's just trying to reconnect with at him or
Yep.
find a way to get involved, and I'm just not going to do that. But I think that backfired in the end because when does it stop then? That's the only trouble by ignoring it, I guess. And in your case, if it's still going, you know, does it stay the same, or is there a point where they go, I'm just not getting enough gratification from this, I'm gonna increase it?
Yeah, you don't know, and that is the difficult part of it. But flowing on from that Victorian Law Reform Commission, now the record, talking about how to fix it, provide training and enhance frontline police understanding and identification of stalking behaviours. Because it is something there's a subtlety to it that doesn't always fit in the psyche of police. Okay, this one is a concern, that one's probably not a concern. And these are the judgment calls. But, as they say, knowledge is power, and the more we know about it, we might be able to identify it. I like, from the Netherlands, I think each station had an expert attached in stalking expert, some expertise in the command or in the police area. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, and really thorough ways of, putting each situation through an assessment process to try to determine the level of risk to that person. And I guess also looking at risk as not just physical risk.
Yeah.
It's a bit more broad.
Yeah.
I think understanding the nuances of patterned behaviour and subtle behaviour and being able to jump on that quickly.
Well, I suppose encapsulating what we've talked about, it would be in everyone's benefit that as much documentation as possible, if these type of things have occurred, proper training, having police take action where action's needed, and changing the perception that this stalking is not it's not something to be laughed at or dismissed as trivial. And understanding that there's an impact that doesn't necessarily have to be physical injury, but psychologically, mental health, social, financial, all that impact.
Exactly, yeah. I think, all those things you say, all those sort of mental health ramifications, but not just mental health, just life ramifications that people should not have to be putting up with. And I mean, it is a crime, so it should be treated that way. That's something to remember too. It actually already is a crime, so that should be recognised by the public and by police and by perpetrators, who I think feel quite. They seem to feel quite emboldened and quite brazen to do as they wish.
Well, there were some examples in your book where the perpetrators, the courts didn't come down on them as hard, or the police didn't come down on them as hard as people thought they should, and that just emboldened them. And they thought, oh, well, see, I've told you what I'm doing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I can get away with it. I mean, like I said, in my case and many of them, these people aren't hiding. They're out in the open. They're using their own names. They're not even trying to keep it a secret. So they're really just, they know how the community views it, I think, and they know how to get around the law.
Well, I suppose society and the community evolves, and it's got to be said, we're not going to put up with this. The community, the world's changed, standards change, and it's not acceptable to impact on people's lives that don't want you in there.
Absolutely. And how to do that, I think more conversations need to happen.
Definitely.
People need to feel safe, not just physically safe, but emotionally safe and supported to be able to talk about their experience and not be laughed at or dismissed in the ways that we've spoken about. And I think that's a critical step to change.
Well, this might be you talking about it in the book, and if anyone wants a deep dive into stalking and all the nuances surrounding it, book Obsession, please have a read, because I learnt a lot, and I didn't think I had that much to learn about stalking. I thought I knew a lot of it from my time as a police officer, but I've learned a lot about it and the impact it has, and it sort of opened my eyes up to it. And full credit to you for getting out there and drawing on your own experience and educating people. So,
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, and I appreciate the time.
Well, thanks for coming on I Catch Killers.
Thank you.
Cheers.